Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime, host across the table, Derek Cohen, our Chief of Research. Derek, lots to talk about. Since last we met on our podcast, election this week. So we will jump into all of those things. But first, as always, we like to do a little hot take at the top. Question that has been going around is, what is the best trilogy of all time? Is it The Matrix? Is it Star Wars? Is it Lord of the Rings? Or is it going to be Trump?
Well, can we go like Godfather, but we watch two twice and lose the third? Like,
what are you saying about the third? Because, what are you saying about the third? The third
Godfather?
Well, the third Trump, right?
Oh, the third Trump.
What are you saying about that?
Oh, I was about to say, no, not taking that bait. I see where you're going with that. No, this is the inevitable ascent of Barron as our first 9'7" president. I think he's going to run a very strong ticket with Victor Wembanyama probably, and
wow,
yeah, but just very surprising because you all saw pictures from the first term when he was in his mid-teenage, early teenage years. Yeah. And now he's, like getting to, and like Dwight Howard size.
So to the horror of the left, what you're saying is that actually it's not going to be just the 3 episodes of Trump. There's going to be like 9 more episodes.
Well, it depends. I think he's probably going to, that is true. But I think first we're probably going to have like a Euroball tour before he comes back and goes on the. It won't be like the Miami Heat. It'll be somewhere at least. It'll be like the Bucks or something.
So on to on the next episode of The Right Idea, we'll discuss who is the Jar Jar Binks of the Trump administration. All right, but before we get into that, before we get fired, the reason you're all here is to talk about the election, and who better to talk about it with us than our CEO of Texas Public Policy Foundation, Greg Sindelar. Greg, thanks for being with us. This is the first time you've been on the show.
Yeah, hopefully I'm not the Jar Jar Binks of TPPF.
Well, we wouldn't say it if you were.
But we do laugh all the time. We'd say that we're contractually obligated by you and others to talk about school choice, which we will get to at some point.
Good.
But there's a lot to talk about with the election. So let's dive right in. Let's just get hot takes. Let's just get your sort of, we've had, obviously the night, I think, first of all, we were all super surprised to even know that we were going to have an outcome by the end of the evening. So that allowed us to the last, 2 days to kind of digest kind of our, what we think all of it means. So just to get your initial take on, Trump and his big landslide, mandate victory.
Yeah, well, and we just found out, I guess, was it last night or early this morning, Arizona is called for Trump, so now we know at least all the states. But really, the thing that I took away from it was people were really dissatisfied with where the country was going. I think in 2020, they wanted something different based on COVID and all these other things, and then they realized, well, I don't want that. And, in President Trump, they felt like there's a good economy. They felt like they had free and prosperous lives, and people wanted to get back to basics. They didn't care about men playing women's sports or men being in locker rooms. They didn't like the open border and the 10 plus million people that came across. And so they felt like America had ceased to become what it was supposed to be, and so they knew that President Trump would bring it back.
Just to and highlight that point, for 2 years, Gallup poll has been asking people if they're satisfied or dissatisfied with the direction of the country. For 2 years, that number has been at 75% or higher of dissatisfaction. Right now, you guys know
That's
I
shocking.
talk about.
I don't know why we're shocked.
I mean, every month. I mean, this should, if you're an insider, or, if you're watching the politics of all this and you're on the Biden team, this just has to horrify you. It has to haunt you every single day that you're getting 75 and 80% of the country for more than 2 years saying that they're dissatisfied with how you're running the country. You guys know I talk about polling all the time. I always talk about trying to get to 70-30 issues, 80-20 issues, right? Because those things.
He did get to a 70-30 issue.
Yeah, that's right.
Those things transcend politics. It transcends partisanship, right? So now you're starting to pull in a hefty majority of independents. You're getting maybe a majority of even, the Democrats, people are on the same team, are all saying, hey, something's wrong here. Derek, your takeaway from that, was it similar, or do you have a different take?
Well, so I guess my yes and to your yes and to Greg's is essentially, the standard political headwinds that campaigns face. They're people boiling it down. They're like, oh, well, Trump's favorability was underwater vis-a-vis. Well, I mean, they're both underwater, but vis-a-vis Kamala, his was lower, right? Mm-hmm. But again, that exists in a vacuum. That's probably the best, I would say, extract of, oh, I'd like to have a beer with this guy, or, for most standard voters. The problem
just real quick, when I was on the Cruz campaign in 2016, I mean, we would talk about that all the time. The last three candidates standing were Trump, Cruz, and Hillary, and they were the three candidates with the least favorability than any of all of the candidates, right?
But you know what? It means people know your candidate, or know of your candidate,
right,
I should say more specifically.
Yeah, but go ahead.
And so, but the thing is, like, that exists in a vacuum. That's a snapshot, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think even though you had these the economic metrics being what they were, despite the gaslighting that attended that, basically the just unfavorables on the policy positions alone, it led to this thing where it's like we're all living in this, this real world, or even we live in a bubble in a way, but like not as detached as, say, the center left media bubble. Mm-hmm. And so when they actually said, like, wow, people are not jiving with this whole, they're not getting on board with it. That's when we have the parade of just basically, I think Chuck called them psyops, but just manufactured crises. Remember Project 2025, like that.
I don't know anything about it.
Of course,
but I know I don't like it.
But they started pushing that whole disaster thing, and then of course normies started running with it, like Project 2025 is going to mandate that Pizza Hut bring back the buffet. And stuff, and all
okay.
the
fun with it. Yeah.
And so, but, like, it
you
even
have my
showed,
attention.
Yeah. But well, don't get me wrong. I think that would be we'll have to talk to Kevin about that, because I think that's actually something where we can wait first 100 days. But there was that. There was this last push that Trump is literally Hitler, literally a fascist, and then I think the one that was the biggest dud of the entire election campaign was the JD Vance is weird, and the guy they put on the attack for the JD Vance is weird was the weirdest guy ever. Yeah. I don't want to.
Someone teach him to wave.
Meanwhile, JD Vance is hanging out.
Car dealership thing, just like fooling around.
A wacky waving inflatable arm flying tube man.
Yeah. That's Tim Walz. But but meanwhile, JD Vance is giving these interviews, and and Theo Vaughn and Rogan and others sounding completely normal.
But then he was like, I yelled at, or he told a story about getting that, and he told his kid to be quiet. He was on the phone. Everyone's like, JD Vance is an abusive dad. Oh, what a weirdo. And I'm like, not nearly as weird as stolen valor pretending to be an assistant football coach and then saying AOC can dial up a pick six or something. I was like, well, no, the score is 0-0.
Didn't he call? He didn't use fourth quarter. He said like the final period. We're in the final period of the football game or something.
That's really bad.
Maybe he's a hockey coach.
So I'm gonna I have refrained from doing this in the last couple of days because I wanted it to kind of play out. But maybe that's a good place to start. And Derek has already started it. But assess the campaigns, Greg. Start with what did Kamala do wrong? In your mind, what do you think were the sort of the big moments? The big choices that you think that the shit she made that ultimately doomed the campaign?
Well, I think it started from the beginning. I think it was brilliant how she consolidated power once Biden was pushed out, and that she avoided Newsom and Whitmer and Shapiro and others jumping in.
Yep.
But then once she did that, it went silent. And she wouldn't answer questions, and she flip-flopped on a lot of stuff, but she wouldn't explain why she was now suddenly for fracking and all this and things like that. And people didn't know who she was, and she had to realize you have a little over 100 days until the election. People have to know who you are, and they know what the last 4 years have been. And you're saying, well, you're an agent of change, but what are you changing from the last 4 years? And she spent no time doing that, really, till the end.
Letterhead.
Yeah, that's right. And so to me, it was just a really poorly run campaign. They were trying to hide her, and then you saw her go on Anderson Cooper and do all those other things. You're like, oh, okay, maybe this is why they don't want her to do this, because I don't think they'd figured out what their messaging was on anything. But her debate performance was fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We were talking before this started. Her last speech at the Ellipse was fine, but it was the last speech, and then it got overshadowed by Biden calling everyone garbage. So, it was poorly run, and they didn't really understand fundamentally what Americans wanted. They wanted to feel like they could afford to live in this country again, and to prosper in this country again, their kids to prosper in this country again. And they never really talked about that.
I think it's really good insight in terms of the beginning of the campaign. I mean, I did watch the Ellipse speech. I thought it was her best speech because she outlined all the things, the parade of horribles against Trump and January 6th and threat to democracy, and she did. So she played right into her base. But then the second half of her speech, I mean, I joke with people that like Mitt Romney could have given that speech. I mean, this was all about, about the middle class and about how we're going to, help the middle class and make things fair for people again and so on and so forth. If she had done that at the beginning and then dipped out of the media for a month, that would have been the speech that everybody would have had to chew on. But instead, to your point, what we talked about during that month were all of her flip-flops. Yeah. I mean, she, suddenly was for fracking.
I'm not really the border czar.
I'm not the border czar. I'm for the,
okay.
I'm for fracking and all this stuff. And so that's what we chewed on for like 3 or 4 weeks was like, wait a minute, this is just, she's just a typical cynical politician trying to say whatever, she can say to try and win.
Well, and then you have Bernie Sanders said this. He goes, well, of course she's going to say that. She has an election to win, right? Like that's kind of saying the quiet part out loud. And
thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, it's not really helpful. But the Democrats seem to have completely lost touch with just normal your working class Americans. Mm-hmm. And I think you saw that in the numbers. You see that what's happening in South Texas. You see that what's happening with Hispanics across the country. You see that with African Americans moving further towards Trump. So it's just a complete bubble they live in that they never really got out of.
Before we move on to Trump and what he did right, Derek, I was in a signal chat with a bunch of politicos and seasoned, old guys that are kind of, going back and forth. And
sounds like a lot of fun.
And I asked, I said, guys, just play this out for just a second. What if we were brought in? What if, we were brought in as comms guys and political professionals and whatever brought in to say, hey, we've got, Biden's not going to win. The polls and things are moving in the wrong direction. We're going to have Kamala do it. What would you do differently? What would we have done differently to give, someone in that situation, maybe not Kamala, maybe she was hopeless, but someone in that situation, what would we have advised? And I think that, everybody had their own ideas, but I think the consensus was that whoever made the choice not to publicly, aggressively, maybe even ruthlessly detach her from Biden, whoever made that decision, that was probably the fait accompli.
Throw him under several buses.
Yes, several buses. I mean, and not just saying oh, we're so happy that he, is not, that he's decided to step aside, and then made sort of a rhetorical, I'm going to be different or whatever. I mean, ruthlessly detach yourself to the point that Greg made earlier. 80% of the public for 2 years has said, this guy's not doing it in the right way. You're going to get tattooed with that unless you come out and say, you know what? I was in the room when some of those decisions were made, and I didn't agree with them. I didn't agree with this. I didn't agree with this. And have the media and everybody back you up. I mean, ruthlessly detach yourself. Otherwise, the public is just going to say, "Look, you're just going to be more
4 more years."
Yeah. What do you think of that? Do you think that would have worked, or do you think? Because I bet somebody would argue, "Oh, that would have seemed really mean spirited, and it would have depressed Democrats even more."
I don't think
Democrats care about being mean spirited, calling half the country Nazis and fascists all the time. But
that's a good point.
I think it would have worked on the margins. I don't think it would have accounted. I don't think that alone would have salvaged this campaign at all. But I do think you probably would have seen it it might have been worth a point or two.
Which could have brought across a couple states, right? Like those, those Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, maybe that brings 1 or 2 of those across the board.
But I don't.
It could have. But I think the bigger issue, specifically with that, is when Biden was starting to get flagged, because I think they were asking, you're the polling guy, so you would know. They were asking about, fitness for office going back, at least 18 months from now, 2 years from now. And so he was never, this super solid performer. Obviously all Republicans said, 98% of the programs oh, yeah, he's a vegetable. But, you'd get 30 to 40% of Dean Phillips, basically mortgaged and lost his entire political career in order to point this out.
Yeah.
So at least he thought that it was a good idea. Mm-hmm. And so I do think it would have helped on the margins, but then the natural next day is, then why do you lie to us for 2 years?
Right.
And so I think that not only would you have to compartmentalize the administration in and of itself, you'd have to basically explain your way out of the situation that you foisted upon yourself by your creative mistruth about the health of the president.
But Greg, you wouldn't have had that moment, what I think is the seminal moment in the campaign, because you have 80% that say it's going the wrong direction. You are just in general, refusing to distance yourself from Trump, and then she goes on The View.
Biden, you mean?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Well, she definitely distancing herself from
did a good job distancing
from Biden. But then she goes on The View, and whoever the person who asked the question, I mean, it was a softball. It was a super softball. Hit this out of the park.
It was Sonny. Yeah, Sonny.
Tell us what you would do different
today,
or whatever. And instead of saying, even gently, starting to have some kind of break and showing some, I'm my own person. She says, not only does she say, nothing comes to mind. 80% of the public doesn't like the direction, and nothing comes to mind.
Which you never answer in an interview, regardless.
Right. And then she goes even further to say, I was in the room when some of the decisions that had the biggest impact. Right. So she's actually even going further and saying, not only would I do nothing different, but I was part of the team that made these decisions. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, and I think kind of speaking to that point, the left and Democrat Party has an issue. Like, Trump broke their brains in 2016. They were even though the polling was closer than you might remember, they were so confident that there's no way that he could win. And then they did. They went they just so lost their minds that they started putting themselves in boxes, right, when it came to what I'd call these DEI issues that don't really matter. And so then how do you back yourselves out of that? And she found herself not being able to, she didn't know how to talk to Jewish Democrats or Muslim Democrats, right? She couldn't pick, it seems like she couldn't pick Josh Shapiro to be her running mate because he's a Jewish guy, even though that probably would have helped her win Pennsylvania, right? Like, it's just like basic decisions like that that I think there's something fundamentally flawed within the Democrat Party that they have to have a reckoning about and figure out if they want to be competitive, because if not, they're going to continue to lose most Americans that are like, I don't want any part of this.
And add to that, to your list too, is on the trans issue. Remember, she said, I would follow the law, whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, and then you pick a running mate, right? You don't settle people down. You pick a running mate who might be the most progressive governor in the state, like makes Gavin Newsom blush, right? and let his cities burn during 2020, and people are like, well, this is not what I want either. So it's just a lot of flawed decisions.
All right, so on to the other side. Okay, then to the spoils go to the victors go the spoils. So what did Trump do right?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, but he is who he is, and he was unapologetically who he is. I think that is his number one quality, is love him or hate him, he is not going to change who he is. And the fact that was he 78 years old, can go out there and do 3-hour campaign speeches day after day, week after week, it's remarkable. And he has a remarkable way of connecting with people. And somebody who was born into a wealthy family, made himself even more wealthy, has a remarkable way of connecting with everyday Americans. I think doing real estate, he spent a lot of time talking to construction workers and folks like that, having hotels. You talked a lot to back of house folks. But he just knows how to talk to them and make them feel appreciated, make them feel heard. And he's remarkable in that if he says something, people don't like it, he just moves on.
Yeah.
He doesn't like dig in. He's like, okay, well, people didn't like that answer. I'm moving on. And I think he got ahead. The abortion issue was clearly where the left was going to try to pin him down. He got ahead of that, the way he did at the RNC with this team with the platform stuff, and then really focus on, like, this is now a state issue. I did my part. I'm not going to do a nationwide abortion ban. I think that really kind of neutered a lot of their attacks on him, and then that made all the other major things people cared about, the economy, the border, things like that, and cultural issues. Well, he won all of those others, and so he did a good job.
He didn't
of
engage,
that.
and I just thought of this just now. So it's always good on a podcast to just say whatever pops into your head.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah,
we'll see how it goes.
But they never really reacted to the threat to democracy thing. I mean, they never. You're right, on abortion they did. They knew that was coming. They knew that it was a vulnerability, and they got ahead of it multiple times. But the threat to democracy thing, they never really responded to that. I mean, they never tried to defend.
Which I think
January
is the right
6th.
thing to do.
Sure, yeah.
Because then you give it credence. And you say, well, and all you have to do is look at 4 years ago.
You're right.
Yeah. What did you lose? People might say, look at January 6th, and you'd be like, well, he has his statements about that, right? And so
and Ben Shapiro answered that point. He said, but there was a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th. So like you can't point to January 6th and think, oh, that was the moment that they disbanded Congress and he became a dictator. No, 14 days later there was a peaceful transfer of power from Trump to Biden.
Well, and not only that, but I think the reason that saving democracy was such. Well, first of all, it's an amorphous concept that nobody is like. I don't open a bill I get in the mail and see that I now owe 5 more democracies than I owed, the last month, right? So it's not proximate to people in their decision-making process. Secondly, to the people that do think about this and do think about this in the abstract, the Democrats were also offering an entire portfolio of anti-democratic policies.
Like how they pick their candidate,
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
the
biggest
example.
Anointed, didn't receive a single primary vote.
Well, exactly. I mean, and then beyond that, you have the political prosecutions, and you have I wouldn't even say the political prosecutions, but even the selective prosecutions in the states where they have Soros prosecutors. The gentleman from the train in New York who got prosecuted, who basically, defending somebody. The guy
on the subway.
Daniel Perry. That's right.
But stacking the Supreme Court is something they want to do. They want to get rid of the filibuster.
No. Don't get me wrong. The Supreme Court is per se an anti-democratic institution, but it exists as a check on the ones that we have that are.
Right.
And so that's why I think that whenever they were like, "Oh, we want democracy," okay, what do you mean by that? And it's like, well, no, like we want to do our stuff.
Yeah.
And we have these institutions in the way of us doing our stuff.
Yeah. So
we want to get rid of those institutions. So. Ergo, democracy.
Yeah, now that the Republicans are going to be in charge of the Senate, where are all those calls to get rid of the filibuster?
Well, but to your point, to them, the ends justify the means, right? Mm-hmm. And I think they are perfectly okay with a corruption in the system as long as they get the outcomes they want.
Right.
And that's probably part of their biggest problem right now is they thought they had gamed the system so well. They own the media. They own a lot of these institutions. And they still lost. Mm-hmm. And to the Trump campaign's credit, to conservatives' credit, after 2020, we saw a lot of issues across the states and how we were running our elections. And it's not perfect, but there's a lot of work done to fix those.
The one thing, it just jumped into my mind when you were saying that. The one thing
that's
where I think
the best part of the podcast. Just say whatever you think.
Yeah.
Right in front of our boss. Just say whatever pops in your
I really think the Lions are probably the best team in the NFL right now. I mean, if you watch Dan Campbell's stuff.
Oh, yeah. Fighting Texas Aggie Dan Campbell is the greatest. Yeah, that's right.
There you go. We can agree on that.
Aaron Glenn. Amazing. Defensive coordinator.
But the one switch that flipped, the most notable switch that flipped, and I'm not saying this was worth 2-3 points, but it did allow the bank to get built up, is the perspective and talking points used by the Trump campaign and the Republican Party on early voting. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something. I mean, you remember, like, I think it was a 22 campaign where basically anything other than in-person day of standing in line for 3 hours, ballot checking was seen as de rigueur, right? Like it was something
un-American.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, when it comes to resonating with the normies, a working mom might get off early in the afternoon on a Wednesday, but that doesn't mean that she's going to be available all morning into the afternoon on Tuesday. And so being able to vote on their schedule, I think allowed a lot more, enfranchisement and ballot access to people that otherwise, don't have, white collar jobs like us and like a lot of the folks on the left.
Yeah. One final thing I'll say about Trump, and then get into some other topics is, there were a lot of, especially in October, there were a lot of, stunts, right? There was a lot of, they're throwing whatever they could at the wall. But what I thought was interesting was, if you look at, the McDonald's stunt and then, the garbage truck and all of that, yes, they were stunts and they were trying to get attention and whatever, but they had a core message, right? I mean, it validated his core message about him working for working people, or and caring about people who are in these jobs that aren't going anywhere, that they're being hurt by inflation or not having jobs and all of that. So even though they were stunts, they had a core message to it. If you look at Kamala, her stunts involved like doing those skits from SNL that were just totally tone deaf, or she would have Cardi B at her, saying crazy things, or walking around with her elitist friends. And
now Cardi B is a singer.
Yeah, or there was this big push towards 18 to 24 men towards the end of it, and while
dudes for Harris.
While they're
trying to browbeat him.
While Trump is going on, Rogan and those kinds of things, that I actually thought it was a pretty brilliant idea to get the Avengers, right? They assembled the Avengers to come together, except that it wasn't the Avengers, it was the actors, the left-wing radical.
Yeah, Mark Ruffalo, the most left-wing.
Right, Don Cheadle and Scarlett Johansson, they weren't the Avengers, and so they just totally missed the mark on that. And so every time they would try to do something like that to get attention, it actually validated all the criticisms.
Tim Walz trying to hunt, can't get his gun to work.
Right, or talking about football and saying fourth period, and so it actually validated all of the negative thing. The stuff that Trump was doing was validating that he was actually for his message, and then the things that they were doing were validating the criticism.
Well, it helps you can pull it off, right? Like he looks like somebody that could work at Walmart or could be in it's amazing, right? He's not like Michael Dukakis in a little helmet,
his head up through the tank.
Most people probably watching Michael Dukakis.
Now, Jefferson, Michael Dukakis was a presidential candidate.
Yeah, 1988. It's a long time ago. But yeah, he pulled it off. That's part of it too.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit to the work that lies ahead. There are two truths in politics. One, there are no permanent victories. I mean, just look at what's happened. 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, then Trump, Biden, Trump. Congress flips back and forth all the time. State legislatures, everything else. So no permanent victories, right? So you have to be vigilant. And then number two, there's history is riddled with examples of the winners squandering their opportunities, right? And I think if you talk to folks from the first Trump administration, that first 9 months to maybe a year and a half was incredibly difficult because I think Trump would even admit,
figure out how anything worked.
Right, how anything worked. And I think even Trump would admit, because he fired them all, right, is that he maybe hired the wrong people to put in certain slots or whatever. And so, how do you, hit the ground running? And so we as a conservative movement and leaders in the conservative movement, I think we have a real charge. And since you're the head of it, this may be your charge, Greg. How do we make sure that, number one, we sort of keep our heads on straight and realize this is not a permanent victory. This doesn't mean that, conservatives are going to win every election from here on out. And number two, what are the things we really need to focus on, from the first 100 days to the last 100 days of this term, that to ensure that we're not squandering this opportunity that conservatives had. And it's even a bigger opportunity than we assumed, because not only did we win the White House, but now we control Congress. So what are you thinking about in terms of how to make sure that we make the most of this opportunity?
Yeah, I think your point is really good, because conservatives tend to be complacent. We pass a bill and we're like, oh, we did it, high fives. It gets screwed up in implementation. We win an election and we're like, oh, things are going to be good again. And I think it comes from the core of being a conservative. You just want to be left alone. You don't want this to be what you think about. We do this for a living, but most people don't want this to be something that matters to them every day. Yeah. But I think we learned a valuable lesson, to your point, in 2016, 2018, where we weren't able to maybe get as much accomplished as we wanted. And so to me, it starts with personnel. Personnel is policy, and so you got to get the right people in to the right places. I think that's a huge difference we're going to see from 2016 to now, is the Republican Party hadn't fully embraced President Trump at that point, and now they have. So everybody wants to serve now. So their pool of people who are part of this movement is much larger and probably much more qualified. So I think you'll see a lot more qualified people going into administration, filling those thousands of jobs. I think the Senate's probably in a point now, hopefully, I don't know what's going to happen in Pennsylvania, but if you can get where you can get people confirmed at a much faster clip and get them permanently in place. And so I think that will be a big deal. And then I think the other thing is, if we have Congress, you have to use it. You have to legislate. We've already passed out of this U.S. House H.R. 2, a really good border security bill. Never got heard in the Senate. They always talk about, we passed this bill and it never went anywhere. Right? Well, that was a terrible bill. It literally codified a certain amount of illegal immigration. This H.R. 2 is an actually really good bill. And so we passed out of the House, so now pass it, send it to the Senate now that is controlled, and get it to Trump's desk. That should be, day one type of stuff. And I think you build from there. You got the tax cuts coming in 26. You have the review of the USMCA and what are the things that you can do. Start enforcing, getting your EOs together and on the border and all these other things that we really need to do. get rid of the EO that banned LNG exports. I think there's all kinds of things we can do to unleash it. The thing I'm most excited about is the Elon Musk commission, the Doji commission, right?
Government efficiency.
We talked to the Trump administration, and they were looking at doing a grace commission from the Reagan administration in 2016 and never fully got together. But if you do something like that with some teeth, I think you can really unleash American businesses and the American people. And so I'm really excited about that. But we have to do it. And as here in Texas, what we have to realize is you won't always have a friendly administration. We have to learn that lesson. And so while we might now have a federal government that wants to go secure the border again, well, we have to be prepared for that next administration that won't want to do that. And so we need to do the things now to be ready for when bad times come again.
And since Trump can't run again, he's basically a lame duck, and that's an open seat. And so there's no guarantee that, even if Trump changes the world and everybody's moving in the right direction, the fact is, it's going to be a new person. Even if you're carrying on that legacy and it's J.D. Vance or whoever, you're still going to be a new person. It's going to be an open seat. So that's going to matter. I think Greg checked all the boxes on most of the issues. The one thing that he didn't mention, which apparently there's a video going around, I don't know if it's new since he won or if it was taken over the campaign, talking about what he's going to do about DEI and the woke BS that's going on in the federal government on day one, and ensuring that no children are subjected to the horrifying mutilations and those things. Do you think that's going to be another opportunity, Derek, in terms of just sort of addressing the woke DEI stuff writ large? And then what else do you think is a good opportunity for conservatives?
Well, I think, yeah. And Greg took all the I wouldn't call them low hanging fruit because I think they're so well supported, they're on the ground by now, right? But I think that another thing, eliminating DEI and stuff from our federal government, so hopefully starting with the military, would be one of the most important things that he can do. The thing is. And I said this when we talked about this issue before, the problem is not DEI in and of itself. It is an environment and culture that allows that kind of a rot to flourish. And so that's, the DEI is the symptom. It's not the cause. And so I think that what they need to do, and I think that this would be, if he does accomplish this, would be probably the most consequential thing a president's done in generations, would be we need civil service reform. The reason that we have an ensconced bureaucracy that basically, I think we can say as of Tuesday, we can say works against the will of the American people in many, many facets, you're not able to fire any of them. We don't have a sunset process for federal agencies and federal departments and federal programs like we do for Texas. If you are even a Governor Abbott appointed person high up in Department of Public Safety, Department of Criminal Justice, HHS, the agency that you work for very well may disappear in the next legislature if it is not serving Texans, right? We don't have anything like that or any sort of animation in our thinking like that. So one of the things that I think that President Trump should do and should look for is really changing around civil service. The reason that Loper Bright was as impactful as it was, and why the blob started screaming like it did, was because that loosened a little bit control. That chipped off just a little bit of that plaque.
Loper was the Chevron deference?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I am assuming that our audience is bright enough and smart enough to know what that is.
We can bring Chance
on.
Like,
what's Chevron deference?
Yeah. It means you usually go to Chevron instead of like Speedway or Shell. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. So I'm like, the deep state as it is, because everyone thinks it's just like this nefarious clandestine paramilitary operating. It's like, no, this is just standard bureaucracy 101. And when you protect that bureaucracy, or you insulate that bureaucracy from any accountability or any change, you're never going to get that. So like I said, DEI stuff is good, but what you need to do is actually rip the roots out.
Greg, I know a document that discusses civil service reform that was vilified quite a bit during the campaign, but we'll set that aside for now.
Well, there was an EO at the very end on that. Was it Schedule F? Where the employees, and so I'm sure that will be back. And you're 100% right. And if nothing else, like look at the bubble those people live in. Look at the
map. Look at the map of North Virginia.
Yeah, Northern Virginia, D.C., Chevy Chase, Maryland, like these Silver Spring, Maryland, like these places, like they are part of the left Democrat apparatus, right?
Did you see the final results for Washington, D.C., the vote?
It's like 6% Republican. 92 to 6, and then I don't know, I guess Jill Stein got a few percent.
Yeah, she probably got more than Trump, actually. All right, well, you talked about Texas. I wanted to shift to Texas as well. Any thoughts on the election here in Texas? Obviously, we didn't have the statewide, and that's going to happen in 2 years, and so it's kind of funny. We have a presidential election, but the real big election usually for Texas is in the off years. Any takeaways from what happened in Texas? It looks like we're gonna the Republicans are gonna add 2 seats in the House, add 1 seat in the Senate. So again, the prognostications of Texas being a swing state or Texas turning blue. I mean, our colleague Chuck DeVore, has said, can we finally put this aside for now? Can we stop the
Should I tell George Soros, if you pay me $50 million, I will burn it in a much more polite way than the left is burning it currently in Texas.
Maybe that's how we bring the Aggie bonfire back. Is we just burn George Soros' pile of cash every year.
We could make the most incredible, huge, wonderful
beautiful bonfire
of
left-wing radical money. All right, but thoughts on Texas?
Yeah, Texas remained Texas. It's more conservative today than it was yesterday. And I think the story of Texas happened in South Texas, right? Like Janie Lopez won. Abel Herrero's seat, who it does not go unnoticed to the governor and many other people, the one who always ran the budget amendment to try to get rid of school choice. His seat is now occupied by a pro-school choice Republican against Solomon Ortiz Jr., right? That is a very well-known name down in that area. Adam Hinojosa beat incumbent Democrat in the Senate. And if you look at the maps, Trump won all those border counties, most of the counties down there. Ted Cruz did extremely well down there. And if you want to know why Donald Trump won Texas, by like 12 points, 13 points, whatever it was, and Cruz won by 8 or so points, that, it is South Texas went more red. And the outskirts of Harris County I went more red too, especially the west side. And so I think Texas is set up to do a lot of great things, but as I was telling our staff yesterday, I go, elections only matter based on what elected officials do with it.
Right.
But I think it's clear that there's a mandate in the state to continue to be bold. I think the governor knows that, lieutenant governor knows it, all these House members and senators know that. And so I expect a lot of great things next session.
We're going to jump into our 10-minute drill, which is the sort
it's
of
where we score all our goals in this period.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's right. But that's because our first segment that we call Survey Says, where we go through some polling. I mean, let's just jump right into the Texas polling. I want to talk about that specifically in South Texas. I mean, maybe the story of the nation, but certainly the story of Texas was what happened with Hispanic voters, specifically Hispanic men. Across the nation, I looked at the exit polls this morning. Across the nation, Hispanic men, there was a 35-point swing from 2020. I mean, 35-point swings are what happened over a decade with some demographics. There was a 35-point swing. They went 23% for Biden. Hispanic men went 23% for Biden. Went plus 12 for Trump. I mean, that is enormous, right? And then even amongst women, they still
Morning
voted.
Joe tells me that's all misogyny and racism, though.
I can't
Joe
wait
Scarborough
for
would know it.
the Hispanic white supremacists are going to be a whole new thing. And although Hispanic women still voted for a majority for Harris, they dropped 17 points amongst Hispanic women. You mentioned the counties in South Texas. Trump ran the table except for El Paso, which is not a big shock. But I mean, even counties like, where was it, Starr County, that had not voted for a Republican since 1896. There was a 15-point margin of victory there for Trump. And across the board, Hidalgo, Cameron, Webb County, Maverick, Valverde, Zapata, all went for Biden last time, and then shifted over to massive 20-point differences for Trump. What's as somebody who's been doing a rural tour around the state, and you've been to South Texas a few times, did you see any of this? Did you hear any of this? And then what is your takeaway from these results?
Yeah, and you started to see this after 2016, right? Like, and Hillary won those counties by massive margins, and then by 2018, 2020, you are starting to see the shift. And I think it's really a cultural thing, is that the left has abandoned anyone who is pro-life, and they talk about, well, we want to protect our daughters. Well, the men are probably thinking, well, I want to protect my daughters from men being in their locker rooms or on their sports fields and things of that nature, and want to celebrate like letting women be women. And so I think that's part of the shift. And then it's economics, stupid, most of it, right? Like the left has completely abandoned working class Americans, and to Trump's credit, and to a lot of credit of a lot of Republicans, they've learned to talk about it. They learned to be present, and the state party and other folks have really started building a presence there, and I think you're going to continue to see that. What would be really interesting is in 26 and 28, when Trump's not on the ballot, do you continue to see those trends? I think that you will, right? Janie Lopez won her race in 22. That was her first win, right? Yeah, if I remember that correctly. And so does that continue? When Hinojosa is up next, does he win that again? Do you make more gains there? Because you look at some of those other Texas House members, a lot of them are in districts that now are Republican plus 2, or I think Oscar Longoria is like Republican plus 8, so and so it's going to be really interesting how if that trend continues.
Derek, one of the races I'm not sure you mentioned it was down to Uvalde. So the Sheriff McLaughlin, of course, Mayor. I'm sorry, Mayor McLaughlin won that race. I mean, this was for lack of a better term, this was kind of ground zero for the gun debate, right? For guns in schools or for gun violence. I mean, that's an issue that Democrats win on. That was kind of ground zero for kind of making that case about what are we going to do about gun violence. I mean, this is a horrific, tragic event that happened down there, and yet the mayor who was very aggressovely pushing back against Beto. That was kind of his moment when he stood up and said, "Get out of here."
Played that. I don't know how many times he played that on TV.
So they came after him for that, and yet he won. I think he won by like 15 points or something.
Yeah. Well, to be fair though, and this is not to say anything against Mayor McLaughlin, who absolutely comported himself not only after the tragedy but navigating the cross currents.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
But that district that was a Republican district for probably close to a decade. The person that was in that seat, Tracy King, very, very honorable man, Democrat, but also very, very conservative Democrat. If you look at his voting record, he voted the right way on SB 14. He voted the right way on numerous other things. Now, look, did he see eye to eye with the Republicans on absolutely everything? I can tell you in 2021, though, he stayed in town.
That's right.
And so he was a good representative of the district, and people like Tracy King simply just aren't welcome in the Democrat coalition anymore, even though he overlaps probably with whatever the center of gravity is in the party, probably 65-70%. And so when he stepped down, and you had somebody who had been at the very least in the state spotlight, if not the national spotlight, comporting themselves as they did, and Rep-elect McLaughlin. It was probably a very easy box to check for a lot of the people down there.
And I didn't pay as close attention to that race as I should have, but maybe the Democrat were they more of a traditional, let's run on hating Trump and all that.
But here's the thing: nobody knows because it got no coverage because that was like how foregone of a conclusion that district.
Yeah, I think the state Democrat Party and most Democrats were like, okay, well, that one's going to flip back to Republicans. I don't think anyone expected it to go differently.
Yeah, but because they completely extirpated people like Tracy King from their party.
One of the other things that jumped out at me, Greg, from the exit polls was black men, and I think they're getting a lot of criticism today. And there was a lot of pressure. Obama was wagging his finger.
That always works. So you tell people you aren't doing the right thing.
Yeah, but the exit polls show that there was only a shift of 4%. I mean, they still voted for Harris, but there was only a shift of 4% from Biden. However, it was a 13% shift from Clinton. So it had already been moving down in that direction. And then, of course, I don't think Harris did herself any favors with her policies and the way that she ran her campaign. But I think they're getting unfair criticism right now because the shift was on the way. I mean, there was a 9-point shift from Clinton to Harris. From Clinton to Biden, and then only a 4-point shift moving in that direction to Trump.
Well, I think people forget that under the first Trump administration that black unemployment were at historic lows, the lowest had probably ever been. And the things that they did, not only with the First Step Act, but also with opportunity zones and things of that nature, trying to bring economic prosperity and kind of get government out of the way of in some of these communities. I think really built relationships that people are like, you know what, they do care, and they do want me to succeed, and the investment in the HBCUs and all these other things that the first Trump admin did, I think it started to kind of crack put some cracks in the facade that like we're always for Democrats, and made them start just to question, wait, what are they actually doing for me and for my community? And when they look at the last 4 years, they're like, man, things have not gotten better. And there's probably some cultural issues there too as well about, I don't agree with some of this woke stuff either. And I think it's just
maybe school choice, right?
School choice. Their schools have been failing them in some of these inner city areas. And so and to be honest, I think it was I can't remember who said it. It was like one of the most salient things I actually heard mainstream media say. But he said Republicans aren't looking at Hispanics and blacks as Hispanics and blacks. They're looking at them as Americans, and that's the difference between the parties right now.
Yeah, I think it was Chuck Todd that mentioned the impact of school choice nationally and how that's drawing Hispanics and blacks.
I think actually, and when we were doing our election night coverage, doing the live stream, I think it was probably articulated best by our friend Dr. J, when he said, he goes, look, we're independent thinkers, we're intelligent people. Stop saying this is the black position and those who deviate from it, they are aberrant or not part of the group. We can make our own decisions for ourselves. And I think that then you send out Obama, who actually has a lot, still to this day, has a lot of purchase within the black community, to hector and belittle. That is political malpractice.
You put that on top of Kamala's like, it's such patronizing, right? Like her, I'm gonna legalize marijuana. Like, oh, okay, well, we're just that's how you look at us, right?
Like explicitly the sop to the black community, which is offensive.
There's a lot of white people in Austin that probably thought that.
Yeah, my neighbor's like, yes, finally, sure.
But the voter ID issue, right? I mean, their number one talking point about voter ID is that black people can't get IDs.
Yeah,
and they're
unbelievable.
I mean, how many videos did I see of black people being like, "What are you talking about, you crazy lady?" The other one that jumped out at me was young people, 18 to 29. Minus 13. They still voted for Harris, but it was a shift of 13 points from Biden to Harris. Now, there was clearly a concerted effort to win the Joe Rogan sweepstakes towards the end, and Elon and
especially
all of that.
Especially going on Theo Vaughn. I think that's really
Theo Vaughn was probably my favorite that he did, but there were other podcasts and all of that he went on. But Derek, Greg, I mean, what do you make of the young people shifting as well?
Let me tell you about kids these days. But I mean, that I think that much like all these questions, there's a way to get them over determined really quickly. Where we're there's a million different factors playing, and I think with young people, it's fairly reductive. What in the Democrat policy? I mean, they were offering hope, vibes, and coolness in this very inauthentic way, as we discussed. Speaking of inauthentic, of things that we had, the manufactured things that we've talked before. Whereas on the Trump side, it was like, hey, again, it was the employment stuff. The young folks these days, again, and this is me extrapolating about a group of which I'm not a part. The young folks these days are like, yeah, I would really like to own a house maybe and start a family, but the economic headwinds being what they are, and so what then does the Harris campaign come in and say, like, oh, well, we're going to double down on the college tuition forgiveness. I'm sorry, the college loans forgiveness. That affects a very small set. I mean, now obviously mostly on the blue side of the aisle, but a very small set of individuals that usually are already baked into that coalition. Maybe you should have said, like, look, if we have $10,000 for college loan forgiveness, maybe we can do, if your car is listed as a work vehicle, maybe $10,000 off that too. Now look, I think both are probably a little probably reckless in terms of spending, but the fact that it's like you just serve the people that are already in your tent, you're not bringing any more people into the tent, and I think the young folks realize that.
Yeah, and two things that I would add to that is, if say you're like 22 years old, most of your life where you're actually cognizant of what's going around, either Obama or Biden have been in control, right? And the only 4 years that haven't was Trump, and they're probably the best 4 economic years of all of that, right?
Very fair.
And so you're like, well, actually, I do appreciate that. And then then when you look at when I started to think that things might be a little different is when they were doing encampments in these college universities, and the students were fighting back, and the students were like, "This is unbelievable that this is happening, and that these adults are allowing this to happen, and that this administration was supportive of things like that." And they started getting, they want to be pro their country, and they want to be pro America, and they want all these things, and they saw they saw what was being allowed and the culture that was being allowed as very anti-American, and so I think you start seeing that shift there.
Even progressives abhor disorder.
So shifting into lies, damn lies, and statistics, I found a report from Brookings Institute, which is another think tank that's more of a center-left think tank.
I think we just end this segment there.
Yeah, and moving on. But one of their scholars wrote in 2020, it's probably safe to say that nothing President Trump has done as president has increased popularity amongst Latino voters. In fact, it's most likely the opposite. Can we finally put this to bed that demographics is destiny? Yeah. I mean, they've been talking about this forever, and in particular in Texas, right? Like demographics is destiny. That's
why they keep burning money here, is they think, eventually.
Right. We're a majority minority state. Everybody assumed 8 years ago or 10 years ago that was going to mean Texas was going to go blue at some point, and yet we could not be a stronger red state, and it's because of Latino voters. And now we know, and in large part because of Latino voters and because of the policies that they support are more in line with Republicans and conservatives, which is an argument that our friend Sherry Sylvester made earlier this year when she wrote, "The Census 2020 won't bail out the left in Texas. Behind all the hoopla, elections are always about policy and ideas, and all of the lefts are bad."
That's correct.
Well, and they have completely cut out anyone on their side that fits into that. Like Henry Cuellar is not really welcome in the Democrat Party anymore, right? He's the single pro-life Democrat left. He's got other issues he's dealing with, but there will never be another one, right? And what they don't understand is they think every voter is the same no matter where you're at, and culturally what they don't understand is what Texas is really about. And so they don't spend time down in Eagle Pass or McAllen or any of these places trying to understand what these voters want down in South Texas. And to Republicans' credits, they are, and Trump has figured out how to talk to them. And that was a lie when that was written, because they were already moving that way. From 2016 to 2020, at least what we saw in Texas is Hispanics were already moving further towards Trump and away from the Democrat Party.
Can we put the swing state myth to bed finally?
Well, no. Actually, if I think of anything, I think we can put the blue wall myth to bed. But I think the swing state myth, actually, the fact that Ohio. It was funny because I
meant Texas is a swing state.
Oh,
sorry.
yeah. But I think like nationally, we've swing states have become more important if anything. But
or the other one they say is it's not a red state; it's a non-voting state. That's another coping mechanism.
Which there are, if that's the case, there are many non-voting states, and you know how you can make it even less voting state doing stuff like ranked choice voting. But since not as an aside, but I don't know if y'all saw.
Thank God that's been going down.
Alaska not repealed their controversial ranked choice voting.
Colorado.
It went down in 6 other states.
Idaho, Colorado, yeah.
But it passed in D.C.
So why? They don't need it. 92% voted for. Like, what are they?
Well, it's going to be like, I vote for Kamala, and I vote for Kamala, but this time in blue ink.
They're mad about the 6%. Like, we got to take away the 6%. And they have it in Maine, and of course, Maine hasn't voted for a Republican statewide since Paul LePage and 2008.
Terrible policy.
Absolutely.
And if you want to sow distrust in voting as an institution, ranked choice voting is the way to go, because you will not know your results forever.
Yeah,
it takes forever.
All right, so last segment is, what are we watching? We have about 2 minutes left. This has been an awesome discussion. It's gone really fast. I think we've got a lot to talk about. There's definitely some things we could have really dialed down on, but we always like to be forward-thinking here at the end of the show, Greg. So, we're now past the election. We've got holidays coming up. We've got, you mentioned the presidential personnel as policy, so we're looking to see how that all shakes out. But what's like one of the main things you want viewers to keep an eye on between now and maybe the end of the year?
Okay. Yeah, at first I thought you wanted to know what I was watching on Netflix. Okay. So, but
he's a British baking show guy.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think the biggest thing is personnel. So I'm very curious. You'll start seeing who's going to be appointed to high level posts, and then from there you'll start filling in. And so be watching that. I think a lot of Texans will be in that. Our very own Brooke Rollins could be in a very high ranking post. No one more deserving. No one who when the chips were way down on President Trump, never gave up on him, and more importantly, never gave up on the America First movement. So that'll be very interesting to watch. And also what policies of transition is really starting to look at. You'll start seeing that, and what's their 100-day agenda. Yeah. And so I think look at that. In Texas, what I'll be looking forward to, obviously, we already know what the leadership in the one chamber is. It sounds like in December they'll have a caucus meeting. Maybe we'll finally know where they're going on leadership in that chamber, if they're going to retain the current speaker or go another direction. And then from there, I think you'll start seeing, okay, what are the policy priorities from that? And the current speaker's already put those out. We'll see and then we'll see kind of how fast those go as we head post the holidays and session starts.
We sort of assume, I wouldn't put any words in his mouth, but sort of assume the governor is going to come out hot with the school choice being an emergency item.
He was speaking about it yesterday, so the day after the election. So it's clearly...
And it feels like there's even amongst people who don't support school choice, they feel like there is a bill that's going to pass. And so the strategy then is, what kind of bill is going to pass. And so
you really got to watch what kind of poison pills to try doing to make it a bad program, or through implementation, the things that they'll do to try to make it not work for families. That's what I'm watching for on the Educrat side, right? Is like making sure that we actually get a good, clean bill passed and a good, clean system installed so that actually serves students.
Yes, and the governor said he has his 76 plus, so I think I'm trusted it'll be a really good outcome. So what I'm watching, though, both at the national level and at the Texas level, is on the other side of the aisle. What lessons do the Democrats decide to take away from this? Are we going to be for 2 to 4 more years of, Latinos are racist and that's why Kamala was denied her eminent destiny? Or are we actually going to have a reckoning there? Are we going to say, maybe the Tracy Kings of the world do belong in this party? Maybe the Henry Cuellars of the world do speak for a large segment of what we could have as part of our voting base, and maybe be a little less strident in their, stuff that obviously, as we've saw on Tuesday, the American people reject wholeheartedly.
Well, if the folks at Morning Joe have anything to say about it, there will not be a reckoning, and they will double down on the...
There's a reason 70% of Americans distrust the media.
I'm watching Leadership Does Matter. There is a leadership election in the U.S. Senate, and so it's interesting that not only is there an election, not only is Mitch McConnell stepping down,
maybe another Texan,
but it's during a transition from coming from the minority to the majority. Another Texan, of course, where Texans are always in the middle of everything. John Cornyn is one of the 3 major candidates for that role. Although I think Thune is fantastic too, and so things change once you become the leader.
Scott just announced today he's going to run for it too.
So. Oh, is that right? And so things change once you become the leader. So maybe there's always some level of disappointment there, but I'm interested to see that matters for pieces of legislation like HR 2. Like what happens? The House can do that in a 24-hour period and get it out. What happens when it gets over to the Senate? What kind of rules do they put in place that allow people to try and put roadblocks in front of it?
And now that it actually means something, will the House still kick it out as fast? Like, right? Like sometimes they kick it out like, it doesn't really matter, right?
Oh, now that it's going to pass, we got to load it up with all our Christmas trees.
Yeah, that's right.
All that kind of stuff. Well, Greg Sindelar, our CEO here at TPPF, this is awesome. Don't be a stranger. Let's come back to the show because I thought we had a lot of fun here and you had a lot of great insight.
Anytime. Happy to do it.
All right. And so for Derek Cohen, my partner in crime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And as I always like to say at the end of the show, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.